Good day. Welcome to Strong Ambition Podcast. Your host, Ryan Qualley, once again. And today we have a guest around mindset of training and nutrition with Kelsey Schaefer, who overcame disordered eating and bulimia to have fitness freedom. And it's a really powerful story. She is a client of mine. Now, before she works with me, she had to overcome disordered eating. And then later on with working with me, we are able to get her to a place where she really feels she has more freedom and fitness in her lifestyle. But I want to dive into that in the episode. It's just super important that if you feel like you're someone who works really hard towards fitness and training and feel like you just can't get it right, you don't know why other people aren't working as hard and making it work, well, that's her story. And we were able to get her to a place where she finds that freedom. And so without further ado, Kelsey will tell the story for you. Here is Kelsey Schaefer. Good day, Kelsey. How the heck are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Well, I am splendid. Thank you for asking. I mean, it's the holiday season, so I'm in a great mood. But I'm super thrilled to have you on the podcast. You know, you've been a long-standing client for a while, and you know, you're also part of the entrepreneur space. So I think it's really helpful for people even to hear from you for that. But I think let's dive into why people need to hear from you, because you have an incredible story. So I don't do too much of an introduction when it comes to podcast guests. I want the guests to kind of introduce themselves. I want you to tell us your story. So tell people who you are and kind of even what you do with your profession and stuff like that as well.
Yeah, so I guess you and I came into contact like 2 years ago, something like that now.
About that? Yeah.
And I basically found you on Instagram because I have always, I think, been kind of hunting for like the right personal trainer. I feel like I was always somebody that was really interested in fitness, and I would even say was slightly obsessed with fitness. And I think I always kind of just wanted somebody to just tell me what to do so I could just do it and not feel like I had to obsess over like the best way to do everything all the time. But I think I always just kind of hesitated investing in like a really good personal trainer. I'd kind of just dabble in like trainers who seem like they kind of did it as like a side thing and they'd charge like $50 a month or whatever. And then you get very cookie cutter workout plans, and I'd like ask questions and basically just end up Googling it myself. And then I started seeing your content, and I remember just liking how thorough you were and how I could tell that I was like, oh, this is like what this guy lives and breathes. Like, I feel like I need somebody like that, so that if I am getting obsessive and I want somebody to just be like, hey, this is what you think is happening, but this is what is actually happening. Let me like pull you back on track here. So I liked your approach right away because I could tell that you were really dedicated to your craft. And then the more that I talked to you, I was just like, it felt like an investment to be like, oh, I'm going to like spend money on myself, you know, like I even had some people ask me like, well, what are you like training for? Like, why do you need a trainer? I was like, I mean, I'm not training for anything. I'm just training to have a life and a healthy relationship with fitness kind of thing. So that's how you and I met. And that was, I think like over 2 years ago now. And it's been awesome. It's been great. I've seen changes in my body, but also just my mindset that I feel like I've been waiting for forever. So every penny was worth it for me. And I think we've kind of become a bit of like business collaborators now, because my partner and I are very heavily involved in online business, and we try to help other people kind of grow their businesses online through social media and just kind of learning really basic digital marketing strategies. Because I think a lot of people who are on the online space don't really know how to use it as a tool to actually grow their business. They're kind of just like posting aimlessly and being like, my posts are getting likes, but I never get any business from it. So that's kind of what we help people do. And now that's kind of part of our ongoing relationship as well.
Yeah. And I think that part is really important too, when we talk about your story and some of the things that you're really so interested in when it comes to fitness and training, and for people to relate to you as an entrepreneur. And I think that's very valuable because, you know, you invest in yourself because you know that it's going to affect the business, right? And I think that's a very effective thing. But I think it's such a good story that you have. And I think there's so many details I think you got to bring out here, because that was a bit of the fast track of it. Because what people need to understand is that you came from a very difficult experience with fitness. So I'm even curious because I know only a bit of it, but I want to go back as far as you can remember. When did fitness become difficult for you? Was it in high school? Was it after high school? When was it where you're like, it's hard for me to have a nice physique that I wish I had?
Hmm. Man, I feel like that's such an ongoing topic that like, because your body and your fitness is not like a finish line. It's not like,
Right.
oh, I got to this point and now I'm like done and I'm going to be here forever. Like your goal might be to lose weight, and then you lose weight and you're like, well, now I want to kind of see if I can like grow my butt or like get, more toned arms. Like your goals are always moving. But I think for me, when it started to take maybe an unhealthy turn, I would say probably in high school. Like I started working out. I started going to the gym when I was 13 because I just wasn't a sports person. I was pretty short and I was too scared to be competitive. So I just didn't do sports, but I knew I wanted to do something physically active because I just kind of felt like it's what I was supposed to do. So I started going to a gym with my mom when I was like 13, and I kept doing that. And then I'd like got really into running and things like that. But I always just felt like my body didn't look the way I felt I wanted it to. And part of that is just like I was an insecure person. So I think I was just had a problem being happy with myself in general. But it's also just like I would try different diets and stuff. Like I tried keto. I would go really hard into intermittent fasting because I always felt like maybe if I do this other thing, it'll get me the result that I want. And then on top of that, in high school, I also developed an eating disorder. So a lot of people will say that if you have a history of disordered eating, then taking up something like intermittent fasting can be a bit of a slippery slope. And so I kind of have this joke now that I say I can turn anything into an eating disorder, because I definitely turned fasting into a bit of a disorder. And I think I turned keto into a bit of a disorder. But I think when fitness became less of like a fun thing for me and more of a like, I need to be fit so people will like me, I would say probably like my last couple of years of high school. And then it took me probably like 10 years of not really liking fitness and just learning how to have a healthy relationship with it. And I think you really, really helped with that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing this because it can't be easy to talk about stuff with disordered eating, and you almost can at least come to it from the angle of healing a lot of the relationships you had with this past self. And I should also put an asterisk, like we almost all have a history of looking at our physique and wanting something else. That was the part that I was curious about, is when did it become unhealthy and you were certain it was? Because I think every female, for sure, going through puberty is going to have an experience of body dysmorphia, or thinking, because your body's changing and you're seeing so many changes in other people and you're not seeing maybe the same change. And then you go through that and then you create the social pressure of a certain physique. Now, as much as you're willing to share, what were some of the things that made you realize that it was disordered eating? What were the behaviors? Because I think it can be helpful for people to realize that borderlines on disordered eating. And I think that's super helpful that you mentioned that fasting does, because that's very much a new term for disordered eating, is just, oh, well, I'm just fasting. Borderlines on anorexia pretty quick. So
Yeah.
what told you, looking back at it, that wasn't healthy?
I think it's so interesting because I am a firm believer that like what disordered eating looks like for one person might not necessarily be disordered eating for another person. And I think that it's about the relationship that you have with it, because there are some people who do fasting regularly, whether it's part of their religion or whatever. And for them, it's like a totally normal and organic thing. But for me, that is a good example of, it felt like something that I was forcing my body to do that didn't necessarily feel right. But I felt like it's like, oh, well, I have to do this. Like, if I want the body that I envision for myself, I have to do X, Y, Z. And I think for me, just anything that deep down I felt negative about, but still made myself do anyway, that's, I think, where the shift kind of happened. So whether it was fasting when I didn't want to be fasting and didn't even really know if it was like working for me, But also, like, if I look back to in high school, I think that if I think about it now, I started to develop like a bit of a fear of some foods. Like, you label foods as bad and you're like, oh, I can't have that. Or like, you don't say I'm on a diet, but if somebody presents you with something, you just always politely decline. Like, I would skip desserts all the time, even when I wanted them. And my body was like, oh, wow, I'm like really craving that right now. I would just deny myself of it because I'm like, you can't have that. So I think just that negative internal language is something that I would say is like the first red flag. Like, if you're putting these limits around your life and you don't even know why, but you're like, I can't do this, I can't have that. I'm doing keto right now, so I can't have carbs. Like, that's where I think it's a fine line and it becomes a slippery slope.
I really love the red flag around I can't have. And for the sake of a physique, I think that's your red flag for a lot of people. And that's where I usually tell people that's when fasting is not a good idea. It's when it's windowed eating, even like I think, especially multi-day fasts is when it becomes really dangerous. And when you're doing something for the sake of fat loss entirely and just grinning and bearing it, that's when it becomes that disordered eating. Mm-hmm. And you're creating the negative language around, like, I just have to do this for now. I just have to. That's where it becomes this internal battle that it's a matter of time before you have a binge bubble and just pops right before you just go. Yeah. So I think that's super helpful. And for people to recognize, now it's one thing if you're doing intermittent fasting, and I think people can do these fasting or keto and say it works for me, but I'd be curious from your perspective, what about it wasn't for you? Because I still hear people say, intermittent fasting kind of works for me, and it is for fat loss. It actually helps them control their appetite. Mm-hmm. And so there is cases where it works. And then the thing I would say for keto is when people say, I feel better on it. And that's different because now, you're doing it a little bit for fat loss and controlling your weight, but you're telling me you actually feel better. I want you to have that, right? So what was it about either the fasting or the keto that, you didn't enjoy or, made you kind of push it a little bit harder?
Yeah, again, just the mindset that I was coming at it from. I was coming at it from like, oh, I'm not trying this to see if I like feel great on it. I'm trying this to see if I lose weight. And I think that even though by the time I did keto, I was not fully bulimic anymore, I still think I very much was like in a disordered eating headspace still. And I just translated that into keto. So I know a lot of people will do keto for like a short period of time and they'll kind of cycle on and off of it. Some people, maybe it's a lifestyle, but I think for me, I didn't really, there were things about it I liked. Like, there's a lot of great foods that you eat a lot of on keto. Fuck, I eat bacon like all the time. And like, there are fun foods that you can eat, but again, it felt really limiting. Like, I remember, actually, oddly enough, one of the things that I missed the most was like a really good crisp apple, because I love just like fruit. And like, if you're really hardcore keto and you're keeping your carbs to like 50 grams a day or less, an apple can be like half, if not more of that. So I was cutting out a lot of foods that I enjoy eating and that I know are, holistically good for my body. But I was like, oh, I can't have those because I'm keto. And there are elements of fasting that I still really like. And I think that when, obviously I'm doing like a bulk right now, so I'm just trying to eat as much as I can at the moment, it feels like some days. But when I'm doing a bit more of a cut or, not eating as much as I am right now, like, fasting is a helpful tool in that. And I also find it's really easy to be productive when you're fasting. Because if you get up in the morning and you're like, okay, I'm not eating till noon today. If you get up at the time that I do, like 5, 6-ish, that's like 6 hours of really productive, solid work that you can get because you're not cooking and then digesting and feeling sluggish. So I think there's still like a time and a place for that. And I think keto can make sense for people in certain areas. I also felt like when I went on keto, I never felt bloated, and I really liked that. And that could just be the food choices though. Like, if you're not eating as much carbs, you're generally not going to retain water. And so you probably are going to have some feelings like that. But I also noticed when I started working with you, oh my God, it felt like instantly when I started reintroducing carbs back into my life, and like mostly whole foods, healthy carbs, my energy was like night and day. And I realized that I had been on keto so long and I'd gotten so accustomed to having lower energy, especially in the gym. Like I remember when I started working with you, one of the questions you asked me was like how many pull-ups I could do. And I think at the time I said like one or two. And then it was like 2 weeks in and I'd gone back on carbs. I'd stopped doing keto and I went to the gym one day and I think I did like 8. And I was like, whoa, I could only do 2 before when I was on keto. Like I just felt like my energy felt stable, but it was like stably low because I did keto for like 2 years, hardcore. And I think the biggest thing that made that a negative experience for me was like, I don't know if it was just the keto or if it was keto and other elements of my lifestyle, but like I gained a bunch of weight when I did keto for 2 years. I think I gained like 25 pounds pretty slowly, pretty gradually, and not all in one place. So it wasn't super obvious to people, but I knew it and I felt it. And I just like kept going with it. Cause I was like, oh, maybe I'm not doing it like hardcore enough. Like I just got obsessive with it. And I think I took it to an unhealthy place. And then I didn't even like the results.
Right. Yeah, I think like you mentioned, there were so many elements like when we started working together that we changed between your workload, adding carbs, and then actually figuring out the right calories were substantial changes.
Yeah.
And I really value some of those things that you said. Like it's always important that people are able to reflect on what they learned from a diet. Like the one thing I really love about yo-yo dieters, because I am and used to be one, is that you deserve so much credit for going through it. And if you're an effective yo-yo dieter, and I say effective for a reason, because you started it right off the bat. It's a never-ending pursuit of fitness and trying to transform your body. You're never fully content. It's always gratified, never satisfied. And so anytime a yo-yo dieter goes through something, it's actually really valuable to appreciate they had an experience. You know, oh, I did the keto for a while. Well, I did a keto for a while. I was like, you know what? I just can't binge a lot on it because there's no carbs. So it gets boring, right? It's like literally, and especially when I smoke weed, that's when I binge. And I remember being hungover and completely in a scenario where I'd eat thousands of calories. And the only thing I could eat until I reached my maximum that I was snacky like was just some nuts. And then I'm like, yeah, I already hit my carbs. I guess I just can't eat. And so it actually did prevent it. And that's one of the main pros of keto is it just prevents you from having food that create appetite. But what I want to kind of come back to is for people to value this because, and you don't have to share anymore and you don't want to, is what level of bulimic tendencies you used to have. Because I think that, you know, sharing stories like this, like I always try to be transparent that I actually used laxatives back in the day. I never actually fully used a compensatory method of throwing up. Thank goodness I didn't, but I just hate the feeling of it. And I would also use exercise, which is honestly a form of bulimia because it's a compensatory method. If I binge and then I do a ton of exercise to make up for it, that's the consequence that I put on myself. And using the compensatory method is what's going to self-propel the very next binge. So I was curious if you would be willing to share what kind of compensatory method you had and how long did it actually last for you?
Yeah, I think you made a really good point there that some of those other methods, like using laxatives or compensating with exercise, in a way can actually become more dangerous because you're telling yourself that it's not the same level as just throwing up, right? So you tell yourself like, oh, I know it's not like the best thing, but is it like the worst thing? Especially the exercise one. I think that is a really slippery slope that people are like, oh, but I'm doing a good thing. But if you're doing it in an unhealthy capacity, is it a good thing? So I think that's a really good point. And I think that's a really sneaky one that people tell themselves is not a disorder, but can become one. It's kind of like weighing food in a way. Like if you're tracking your macros, when you get to the point that you're like weighing spinach and, you know, like tracking mustard, it's a fine line. For me, I can still remember the very first time I made myself throw up because I couldn't do it. And I felt like a failure because I was like, damn, I can't even like do this. And then I remember the next time I tried to do it, and then it actually worked. And you're right, it's a terrible feeling. Like nobody likes it, but you really just, it just becomes something that you do and you don't think about it as a bad thing. So for me, the interesting thing is that I was never the traditional binger. Like I think a lot of people associate binging with bulimia because a lot of people will do it and they'll use it as a way to eat everything they want in the quantities they want, and then they go throw up after, and it's like you're compensating for it. For me, I was never like a hardcore binger, but if I ate anything that I felt like I wasn't proud of, like it wasn't like a really clean food, then I was like, oh, I should probably go throw that up. So I would say I got to a point where like it was kind of a thing that I did once in a while. It was a thing that I did when I did eat junk food. And then at some point, I don't even know if I remember when, it became something I did every day, became something I did multiple times a day. And it was like the smallest thing could kind of set me off. Like I remember I used to work at a golf course, and at one point they brought in this new cake and they gave everybody a slice to try. And I didn't even eat a full slice. I think I ate like a few bites of it, but that was enough that I was like, I have to go get rid of that. And I think the thing that actually really accelerated it for me was when people started commenting that I had lost weight, because when you lose weight, everybody is quick to tell you that you look really good. So people were like really giving me a lot of praise for how skinny I was. And like, they're like, oh my God, I want you to train me. Like, I want to look like you. Like, how do you look so good? What have you been doing? Like, it was all good praise. So then it kind of reaffirms this in your mind that like, this is good. And it sounds so simple to talk about it now from an outside perspective, but when you're in it, it's like, I wasn't proud of it. Like I wasn't talking to people about it. I knew that it was something about me that I didn't necessarily like, but I just kind of ignored that part. Like you just push it out of your mind. And I was just focused on the praise. And so I think, yeah, it started as something that I just did one time. And then the next time I ate junk food again, I did it. And then I did it again. And then I realized like, I don't feel as guilty about eating, unhealthy foods if I just go get rid of them after. And then it just got to the point where it was like a part of my lifestyle. I was doing it every day. I would say up to like 5+ times a day sometimes. And I didn't really, again, I knew in the back of my head that it wasn't something healthy. I was like, am I going to do this for the rest of my life? I don't know. I'm not thinking about that. But the first thing that ever happened that kind of made me reflect on that more was I almost got caught. I think my mom had like seen some bits of food that got stuck in her sink. And I basically just lied my way out of it. And I realized in that moment, the fact that she like addressed me and she was asking me like, are you making yourself throw up? Like what's happening here? And I just completely lied. And I said that something we ate gave me a stomach ache and I had to throw up and I didn't make it to the toilet, and I just lied my way out of it. And then I thought about it after and I was like, I lied my way out of it because I'm not ready to stop doing it. Because I know that if my mom knows that this is happening, she's going to hold me accountable to stopping doing it. And so that's the first time I realized, like, if I'm ashamed of this and I'm not willing for other people to know because I'm not willing to stop, like, am I just going to do this forever? Am I going to live like this forever? I don't know. I don't know if I want that. And that's when I first started kind of reflecting on it as like just paying more attention to what I was doing and not being so ignorant to the reality of what I was doing to my body.
Wow. Yeah, that's a real powerful feeling when you almost get a better self-reflection when someone else is reflecting on a moment with you, rather than just you trying to reflect and justify it on your own terms. If you have to explain to someone what you're doing, it's no different than why binge eaters like to eat alone, and they don't like to eat that amount of food around other people. It's like, then I have to kind of see my reflection of myself in a more honest light. Mm-hmm. So was it years or how many, months, like how long was it? And was that then your transition to slowly get yourself out of it?
Yeah, I would say it was 5 or 6 years. of being bulimic from the time that I first started to like the last time I did it. I would say it was probably 6 years. And even after that, like after I told myself I was not going to throw up anymore, it's not like I was instantly cured. Like I still very much had the mindset that, you know, I needed to like restrict myself in some way in order to look the way that I wanted. But the thing that ultimately, because that happened, and then I was still bulimic for probably several more years after that. It kept going. But the thing that really kind of made me stop and think about it was I went to the dentist, and my dentist has been my dentist since I first had teeth. So he's kind of like a family friend in a way. And I remember he was looking at my teeth, and he got up and he closed the door, and he came back and he was like, "So your gums on the bottom of your mouth are like, they're wearing out." And we kind of just played this little facade. Like I was brushing too hard. That's what he said. He's like, "You must be brushing your teeth really hard." And I was like, "Yeah, I guess so." And he's like, "Okay, so we need to keep an eye on this, because at this rate, by the time you're my age, you're going to have no gums on the bottom of your mouth." And he walked me through the procedure that I would have to get done if that were the case. And what they basically do is they take a piece of the gum from the roof of your mouth, they cut it out, they sew it to the bottom of your gums, and then eventually it like settles in, and that now replaces the gums that you've lost. But it's not even a procedure that is like a one and done. You have to keep getting it done over the years because they'll keep wearing away. And that scared the shit out of me. And I kind of knew that he knew what was going on. I think dentists can tell the signs of bulimia, but we just played it off like I was just brushing too hard. And so that was the first time that I was like, yeah, this probably isn't like good for my body. There's probably other things happening in my body as a result of this that I'm not even aware of. And so that was kind of the beginning of the end. I was like, this is obviously an unhealthy habit, and it's something that I carry with shame because I don't want anybody to know about it. And I think that bled into other parts of my personality as well, like just having that insecurity and also feeling like people liked me better when I was skinnier. So I didn't want to lose that either. Like it's very weird, but it becomes a part of your identity in a way. And even though it's something that I didn't like about myself and I knew I wanted to eventually shed, I felt like it was like part of who I was now. And I was like, well, who am I going to be if I am not this person anymore? Like if I stop doing this and I'm not this thin, like I don't know what version of myself I'm going to be. So that was kind of like the beginning of the transition out. So I would say 6 years in total. But even after that, I found keto and I found intermittent fasting and I found other things to get obsessive about. And I think exercise also became one of them, which when you and I started working together, my workouts in the gym were like 2+ hours, 6-7 days a week. So that was kind of what I turned into my eating disorder, was like trying different diets and just spending so much time in the gym. I would leave the gym every single day, just like drenched in sweat. Like a workout outfit was like a one-timer for me. And that was another thing that I was just like, I don't feel like I look or feel the way that I would like to for the amount of effort and obsession that I'm putting in.
You've said that before. That was one of the biggest things you said when we first started, was you see so many people working far less and getting the physiques they want. And I can imagine going through that many years of bulimia. One of the things I just love that you highlight, and it's so important for people to know, and psychologists know this, that one of the bigger challenges with eating disorders, especially bulimia, is that in comparison to anorexia, and an anorexic person is kind of obvious because they're not eating and their muscle mass is very low. So it's overall just really dangerous and it's obvious to people. But the bulimia isn't, because you can actually carry near a normal body weight. Yeah. And they will get that praise of, oh, your physique looks good. And so the thing that you mentioned is the exact problem with having to try to quit it, because it feels like you're getting good feedback. So it becomes part of your identity, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And it's so normal for people to pour it into something else and to go into fasting. Like fasting has the challenge of well, I can just not eat. And that's like a borderline form of anorexia itself. But let's kind of come back to what you mentioned, because I really like this as a transition. So there was the keto that you tried intermittent fasting. Was there any other kind of methods or tools that you used other than, the 2 hours of training? Is there any other methods or tools? Or were those the main ones over the next few years and you just had limited success with them at all?
Yeah, I had started with paleo, which I think was, my limited knowledge about it was just that it's a more holistic way of eating, and I think you cut out quite a bit of dairy and stuff. It's like going back to the way our ancestors ate, essentially. So that's kind of where I started, and I did that for a little bit, and everything was about like results with me. So I was like, oh well, I'm not seeing the results that I want. I'm not like losing weight or gaining muscle, so I'll just try something else. So I think I was just I thought because I had been doing fitness things for so long and I did like researching about it, like I enjoy learning about fitness, I kind of just assumed that like I knew everything, I guess. And the reason I wasn't seeing results was just because like this diet wasn't working for me. So I transitioned from paleo to keto, and then I think I implemented intermittent fasting. And then I just like kept doing it. And I was also went back to school around this time, and I was super, super stressed all the time in school. So I think I just kind of clung to keto because I didn't want to go through any kind of change or transition period. But I think the keto eating plus the stress plus just like probably still not having a great relationship with my body and fitness, it was just a combination of things. And I think over time I slowly gained weight, but then I told myself that if I went off the keto, then I would gain more weight. And I think I was kind of in denial about it. So it just became another very unhealthy situation. And in a way, I think that even though I wasn't putting the physical stress on my body of making myself throw up every day, I still was in such an unhealthy place with food and diet and exercise. And I saw it as something that was limiting. Like, I think for a very, very long time, I've actually said this to my fiance before. I was like, I think for probably like 8 to 10 years, I really forgot how to enjoy food. Like I really had just a negative relationship with food. And I remember when I first started going to therapy to kind of help me grow out of the eating disorder, that's one of the things that she said that will always stick with me was she was like, I would talk to her about like just certain things I noticed happening. Like I had really self-deprecating thoughts. I was like, I'm really scared of gaining weight. And I feel like every day I'm gaining weight. Like I notice all these changes happening in my body. And she was like, well, Kelsey, you were like, you're going through addiction withdrawal. She's like, you were addicted to something that you can't just stay away from. It's not like a drug that you're like, okay, I was addicted to cocaine, so I don't do cocaine anymore. You were addicted to unhealthy habits with food, and you can't just take food out of your life. So you're readjusting and you're relearning how to have a relationship with food, basically. And that has always stuck with me. And now I forgot your original question.
I really love that it came to that. I don't care. It was basically that. It was, how did you evolve over those years from the former disorder into where you're at? And I think that sentiment is so important for people to recognize. An alcoholic can stay out of bars. It's going to have social situations that are difficult. Someone who has a cocaine addiction can probably avoid cocaine for the most part, but it's really hard when you have really dangerous eating disordered habits and or feeling like I don't think there's a debate whether or not you can call it food addiction or not, but you were addicted to doing some sort of behavior around food. It's fucking hard because food is a necessity for life. So to be able to understand how to change that, and you had mentioned that you had to find a way to enjoy food again, and it's super impactful. So why don't you tell us about where things really started to upswing for you? Now, that could be with me or without me. I want to hear it from your experience. Where was more of the real positive transitions?
Yeah, I honestly think that probably one of the biggest ones was just deciding to bring you on, essentially, because like full transparency, like I said, I'd only ever paid for trainers who were like pretty cheap. And so I think that that's something I've learned in my personal life, but also in business as well, is that if the biggest thing you're looking for is a small price tag, then don't expect a ton of value out of it. And before I started working with you, I told you about a previous trainer I worked with, I think was like 50, $70 a month. And it was just very cookie cutter. Like I got workout plans that weren't specific to me, and the results kind of spoke for themselves. So I think one of the biggest moves was just deciding to invest in myself in that way. And it wasn't because I was competing for anything, or, you know, I'm not an athlete that's like, I need a trainer to help me perform better. It was literally just, I need somebody to guide me because I think that I know what I'm doing, but I obviously don't. And I think that was pretty humbling. I think a lot of people want to assume that they can just learn and do everything themselves, but they don't. Right. And I think a lot of people would achieve the things that they want to achieve if they would just admit that they need help and be willing to ask for it and get guidance from somebody who, you know, for somebody like me, I will often bring like questions and concerns to you and be like, oh, well, I'm trying not to eat this. And you'll kind of question me and like bring me back and be like, no, this is kind of just an obsessive thought that you're thinking. This isn't the reality. You don't need to worry about putting honey on your yogurt. Like I need somebody to kind of give me those reality checks, because I think that I could still have the tendency to slip into obsessiveness when it comes to what I eat and workouts and stuff. And there's pros to that. I'm very diligent. I know you've said that. Like, if you tell me what to do, I'm just going to do it. Like, I just need somebody to guide me. So I think a really big thing was just deciding like, okay, I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to pay more for a trainer than I've ever paid. And I'm just going to trust that it's going to work out. If he just tells me what to do and I just do it. And it turned out to be one of the best relationships I've ever had in my life. I feel like you and I have this great, you know, trainer to client relationship, and it's blossomed into other forms of kind of collaborating and doing business together. But I think that was the first one, was just deciding that I needed help. And if somebody else could guide me, then I would take that guidance. And from there, it was just trusting the process and not overthinking and obsessing every step of the way, because I tend to be somebody who tries to be 2 steps ahead and tries to ask the questions beforehand. And, you know, with you and me, I remember one of the first things we did was like, you scaled back my training because I was doing, you know, I was used to 2+ hour workouts, and you scaled it back. And my instinct was to be like, it's not enough. Like, what do you mean? I'm done in the gym already? Like, what else am I supposed to do? But I just kept telling myself like, but this is what you're investing in. You're trusting the process. So just see what happens. Like, you feel like shit right now and you're not confident in your body right now. So like, is it going to get worse? Probably not. Let's just see what happens.
That was a really fun part of the experience of working with you. And we had you go from where you're 5 days a week. I look at your old protocol where it was like, you know, back and biceps, chest and triceps, leg day and shoulders. And it's just like, okay, in 4 sets of everything. And I'm just like, whoa, if you were in a calorie surplus preparing for a bodybuilding show, this makes sense. For someone who's just trying to go for fat loss and, you know, has no crazy ambitions and plus doing cardio, it's like, you're just tired. You are just drained. You're getting your ass kicked. And so it was fun for me to be able to show you that, wow, this could be a little bit simpler. And one of my favorite questions from you was, is there anything else? Like, are you hiding something from me? And just kind of talk about that experience, because you were so used to being so busy. What do you remember? I want you to go through that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that was like kind of the first thing we did was we were kind of trying to see like where my body was at, what I could handle, and then trying to find like what calories my body lost weight and gained weight at. So it was a little bit of like experimentation at first. And I remember the first week of doing the workouts, they were like an hour and 15, like they were, you know, pretty short. I think I was in and out in an hour most times. And I just remember thinking like, well, is there something that I'm supposed to do when I go home? Like, do I go home and do more cardio, or is there a part 2 that he forgot to put in? And I remember asking you that. And I was like, well, what else do I do? And you were like, live your life. I was like, this feels like a stupid question, but like, I really did mean it. I was like, what else is there? So it was very bizarre because when it's become part of your lifestyle to go to the gym for 2 hours every day, and then somebody tells you, actually, no, you can get more out of just doing an hour, but just do it like this. And then you leave and you're like, well, shit, I have freedom here. Like, wow. But it definitely felt bizarre at first. I felt like kind of anxious about it. Like my body was like, no, we have not worked hard enough. We are hardly even sweating. It was very bizarre. But again, it was just like, just trust the process. Just trust that he might know more than you. So let's just see. So it was definitely a struggle at first. It's super laughable now, but I remember at the time, like it was a bit of a struggle, but like I instantly just felt like it was right because I got to leave the gym not feeling exhausted. I got to go to the gym the next day not feeling exhausted. And I was like, oh, wow, I feel like I actually have like some energy to expend today. And then I would just like go for walks, and I fucking love walking. I love like putting in a good podcast or just listening to music and going to walk, and you feel like you're out in the world instead of just on the elliptical all the time, just grinding. So it really did. Like you summed it up so well. It really felt like I got a little bit of my life back, as cheesy as that sounds. But it just like took the obsessiveness out of it for me. And I was like, oh, I can go to the gym for an hour, enjoy it, and just like feel my body move, and then leave and like live my life, like you said.
Yeah, that's a extremely rewarding thing for someone like you had mentioned who just worked so hard for fitness in the past, and to feel like, why is everyone else not working as hard? And then all of a sudden you realize you actually didn't have to. And just to give you kind of a rundown, which I may or may not have explained to you before, but for the listeners to appreciate what you were actually going through, would have been metabolic adaptation. The one of the biggest challenges your body has to deal with there, and we don't know your calories you were having before, because I'm not sure you're tracking your carbs, but I don't know how much you're tracking your calories total. And so you might have been going in and out of calorie deficits somewhat, and you probably were trying to be in a deficit. But if you're slowly gaining weight over time, you're probably slightly closer to too many calories, especially because if you're on a keto diet, you're eating a lot of fats. It's actually hard to keep fats low unless you're tracking them. They're very calorie dense. And so if your body is predominantly going to deficits, you might have some days that you're over consuming, but then you're outputting a ton of work. The body is just simply going to try to make up for it by controlling part of your metabolism. Metabolic adaptation tends to happen in a non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So your exercise, your push into the max. So on the other side, the body's going to say, okay, well, we're going to slow you down. It's like sitting in a chair, you're not twitching much. You want to walk over here, you're actually going to mentally make an excuse to not go walk over there. And you just nailed that this theory makes sense, because you're like, oh, I just didn't have energy every day. So yeah, because you had to compensate somehow. And when you actually finally start feeding the system, you kind of replenish that. And this was actually the challenge that we had when we first started with you, is I predicted a calorie maintenance, and we thought you were in a slight deficit, and you weren't. This was actually, I remember that was a very disappointing day for you, but you know, we did kind of create a good news out of it. It was like, well, here's the good news. We know where your calorie maintenance is. You actually know what that number is, because if you didn't lose weight in 2 weeks, if we go here, it's not a question, it'll work. Mm-hmm. And that's when we started to see success, right? So, and I'm curious, like, was that actually kind of how that experience went with you, when you actually recognized that you didn't lose the weight, but we actually found the right path?
Yeah. And I think that's what I meant by like, just, you know, trust the process, because I think before, if that had been me just kind of going at this alone, and I thought that I was, you know, dieting, and I thought that I was losing weight, and then you get on the scale and you're like, wow, I didn't. It's really easy to feel disappointed and to be like, well, I don't know where to go from here. I don't know what the fuck to do now. Like, and then you just, you know, do the next restrictive thing. But I think I remember that day with you where I went in expecting to see the numbers come down a little bit, and I think they didn't. And I remember you saying like, this is actually a good thing, because we've learned that this is not a deficit for you. And you were immediately like, this is where we go from here. And I remember thinking like, yes, this is why I decided to work with you, because I just want somebody to be like, okay, this is what this means. This is where we go from here. This is the next step you take, so that I don't have to spiral and overthink it and be like, well, now I need to do this, 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 and this. You're like, no, this is what we do. We take it down to here, and in 2 weeks, we should be on track. And it was just having somebody kind of on my team who knew what to do next and just kind of guide me through it, because somebody like me who is very determined, I can also be a chronic overthinker and overcomplicator. So that was very helpful.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people will classify themselves as overthinkers. And I don't necessarily know what the scalability of that is, like what can constitute an overthinker. But people who care about what they're doing, they're going to overthink about it, right? Like that's actually a natural trait of it, because you're trying to spend time thinking about the act. So I think it's totally normal. And then, like you had mentioned, to have someone to talk to in any realm of your life, when you have a support system to just reflect, and then to have someone kind of steer it. I heard this very well, that an experienced person will make a decision quickly but adjust slowly. Inexperienced person will make a decision slowly but adjust quickly. And I actually kind of use this in a weird analogy of watching a hockey player stick handle a puck. An inexperienced player doesn't know when to make the decision to actually move around a person, but an experienced player will anticipate it very quickly and smoothly adjust. And so that's really where the finesse of over time and understanding the practice, to not panic, to not overthink. No, just go this way, just steer the ship. And that comes from experience. And again, having the support system, what makes a really big impact. I would love to know from your experience, because from then I think we had a lot more smooth sailing, but I still think that there were some major lessons and obstacles for you along the way, even if I wasn't aware of them. And I would love for you to share that. So at this point, we slowly start to see our deficit come out. From there, what were some, even if you can think of any random questions you asked me, because you still do all the time and I love them, what were some big obstacles or lessons that you had over the course of the next year or so that we worked together?
I think the first time that we did a bulk, I remember that was like a pivotal moment for me, because I was like, wow, this is the first time in, I don't even remember how long, that I'm trying to get, I mean, essentially bigger. Like I was like, I'm trying to gain muscle. And I can't even remember a time in my life when I said those words, that like, I'm trying to gain. And I remember my mom, because full transparency, I think I developed a lot of my overthinking qualities from my mom. And my mom, I mean, she was probably raised from a woman who, the beauty standards of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s were always like, be thin. So I remember telling my mom that I was doing a bulk and I was trying to grow my booty a little bit. And she was like, why would you want to gain? Like it was just so bizarre to her, like why I would want my legs or my butt to be bigger. Like it just was so bizarre to her, the thought of gaining. But I remember that was a bit of like a journey for me, just accepting the idea of gaining in any way. And I definitely remember being a little bit nervous about like, what if I do gain fat? Like, what if I feel fluffy? What if I feel like I've like, reverted and gone back to before? But I kind of realized that it was a bit of a silly and counterproductive thought. So I was like, well, there's no way we're moving backwards here. Like we're progressing and my body is going to fluctuate. So even if someday I am the same weight that I was when I started working with you, we're never going backwards. It's all a progress. But that was definitely interesting for me doing that bulk. But again, I just like trusted the process. I was like, I'm just going to do what Ryland says. I'm going to eat in the caloric range that I know I'm supposed to be eating in, or, that I'm aiming to eat in, and like, just trust the process. And it ended up going super well. And I, grew the booty a little bit. And I think I actually ended up losing some fat too. I did a whole recomp, and it was just like, again, I was just like, just trust the process. Like you don't have to feel like you're in control all the time. If I have questions, I ask you and I know that you're going to answer them. and you always have really great answers. Anytime I'm like, why are we doing this like this? Why don't we do it like this? And you're like, oh, this, and this is why. Like, here are all the reasons why we're doing it like this. So every time it's like, I'm never trying to like question your expertise. I'm just always like curious. I'm like, why is it like this? And then you have a good explanation. So it's just constantly trust the process. But I've definitely had so many questions throughout. I remember, I think one of my goals that I told you about was I wanted to be able to do more pull-ups because I just felt like it was badass. And I was like, if I can do so many pull-ups, then I could actually save myself in a life-saving situation. Like, that's some powerful shit right there. And I remember the first time you really started like introducing different pull-up moves into my routine. And I was like, I like dreaded them. I remember I was like, I know I told him that this was a goal, but I just hate that he's putting them in there so much. But I just like every time I just shut up and did it. I was like, just do it. Like, it doesn't matter if you feel grumpy about it right now, just fucking do it. And yeah, I mean, I've never really felt like a struggle while working with you because I always felt this faith, like whatever I was doing, there was a plan and a reason why I was doing it. And I think that's what people really want out of a trainer is like, if somebody is trying to get in shape and they don't work out and they start to strength train, like you're on the right track, but there's so many different ways to do it. Like you said, when I started working with you, I was doing like a bodybuilder split. And for somebody who's not as knowledgeable as you, they might not see any issue with that, but it really depends on like what results are you going for and are you training optimally for those results. So working with somebody who's more knowledgeable than you and who can kind of point you in the right direction, I mean, I think it's more than worth the investment, especially if you are somebody like me who gets kind of obsessive about it and can take it to an unhealthy place.
That's always the dangerous thing, but I tell you, you make the best clients. Because between working with you, working with your sister now, who's done tremendous, is that the people who are just like very diligent, want to do 110% of anything you tell them, it makes my job so much easier. And I swear it was from you. Were you the person who said the best clients ask questions and the other one tells stories? Was that you? Yeah.
You either ask questions or you tell stories.
And I was just like, whoa, that is totally my client list. Like, it's split down the middle of like, and I actually tell the clients that now, because if they start telling me stories without asking questions, they got to recognize they're just rationalizing, not following directions. Because if it's about your story, I will try to be empathetic, but that's not solving your problem. And versus you, like, I rarely heard you tell a story other than a successful story. Hey, this went well. But you would come to me with, well, what do I do for this? What do I do for that? And between you and my other clients, that like the people who ask questions the exact same way that you would, they'll send me like an Instagram reel. Well, what about this? And I'll be like, that's not a good idea. And this is why. And so I like curiosity. Curiosity is going to feed your ability to want to do these things. It's going to make you feel more empowered. And I've always believed that. Like, I want to educate my clients so that you feel like you're in the right direction. I think one of the things that I'm getting the theme from what you keep saying is trusting the process. But I think that might be something for people to really appreciate from your story. That might have been a really hard part for anyone. And how do you think you're able to do that so well? How do you think you're able to allow yourself to, hey, I just got to trust this process?
I mean, I think it's a bit of a personality thing too. Like, in addition to working with you over the last couple of years, I've also done a lot of work on myself and my mindset specifically. And like, I know it sounds so cliche, but I honestly think so many of us live with so many limiting beliefs about what we can and can't do and what's reasonable for us. And we tell stories about, you know, why we can't lose weight instead of actually just doing the things that we know would probably help us do that. And not that losing weight is the goal for everybody. I understand that. But I think exactly what you said, as soon as, like, if you have clients that you're like, hey, you know, I see you've maybe missed 4 workouts this week, just want to check in. And then they get into some huge elaborate story all the time about why they missed the 4 workouts. It's like, you either want to do it or you don't. You're either committed to it or you're not. Like, what did Yoda say? Do or don't do. There is no in between. And I honestly believe that, because I think so many of us kind of tell ourselves stories about why we are the way we are and why we do the things that we do that we're not proud of. And at the end of the day, you can either say, hey, this is something I'm not proud of myself and I'm going to take action to change it, or you're not. And I was just at the point where I was like, I've felt unhappy with my relationship with food and fitness for so long. I'm ready to shed that. And I don't think I want to do it by myself, because obviously it's not getting me where I want to go. And it's actually giving me more stress and anxiety around food and fitness. So I was like, maybe I should just give the reins to somebody else who can just invest in me and tell me, don't do that, do this instead. And if I'm going to do that, then I have to just trust the process. And I knew that when I did hire somebody like you, I think I even told you on the phone, I was like, I will probably be your best client because I will do everything that you tell me to do, because that's how I am. Like, if somebody hands me a roadmap and they're like, this is going to get you where you need to go, it does not matter what's on that roadmap. It doesn't matter how hard it is. Tell me what to do and I will do it. So that's just the mindset that I kept. I was like, you're here to trust the process and let him do his thing and just do it. Like, there's no if or maybe, it's yes or no.
I love that. That's great to hear that, I had that effect. And you're right. Like, I mean, working with you has made me more confident as a coach, because I would lack adherence from clients and I'd question my ability as a coach. And then when you actually follow the rules, or the outlines, like, hey, this works. This stuff really does work. I would love for you to share, though, some more of the soft details, and stuff that's not even necessarily always directly related to me, but and some of it might have been from tips from me. But we kind of glossed over your initial fat loss. I'd be curious if you have tips from your experience, because you've been through a transformation twice now. Like, you've done 2 cuts with me, right? You did your initial fat loss, we did a build, and we did another fat loss, and I think just coming from someone who's, not treating themselves, what were things for you that made your deficit more manageable? Because especially in the second one, it didn't sound like it was hard at all, and it was quicker. And we just kind of said, yeah, I think you're good there. Mm-hmm. And it didn't seem challenging. But what are some tips that you have for people who are trying to go for fat loss that you found was really valuable from your experience?
I think that if it feels like it is really hard for you to lose weight, it just means that you're doing something wrong and you're just not honed in on what exactly that is. Because for me, I mean, not only myself, but I hear people say all the time that they can't lose weight for XYZ reason, whether it's like, I have this thing with my thyroid or my hormones or whatever. And granted, there are obviously situations where people have certain difficulties, but I think most of the time, if you're, for example, trying to lose weight and you're like, oh, I just can't, then you're just not in a deficit. And it just comes down to knowing what those numbers are for you. And that's something that I remember when you and I were kind of learning that. We were figuring out, like, okay, at what calorie range does my body start to lose weight? At what calorie range does my body start to gain weight? And I think for me, I had avoided the scale for so long. Like, I went so long without regularly weighing myself. Part of that was because I subconsciously knew that I had gained weight and just didn't want to acknowledge it. So I avoided the scale. But I remember when you told me, you're like, yeah, well, we're trying these different calorie ranges. It is helpful to weigh yourself, because if you eat at 1600 for a week, it's good to watch your weight and see what's happening with it. And so I kind of just approached it from more of like a science experiment as opposed to putting a lot of thought into it. So now I weigh myself probably every single day, and it doesn't feel obsessive. And I honestly forget about it most days. Like, I intend to log it in the app with you, and some days I just forget, because I just see it as like, okay, so now I'm eating in a caloric surplus. I'm lifting really heavy weights. I'm trying to gain. So naturally, I expect that the scale is going to go up. But now when I watch it go up, it's like, oh yeah, that was expected. And once you kind of know your numbers and you're like, okay, I know now for a fact, I know now that my body will start to gain weight around, 2,400 calories with the kind of volume that I'm pushing right now. I know now that my body will start to really lose weight if I bring that down to like 1,300 calories. And I know that anywhere in between that, I'm probably in a bit of like a maintenance where I'm going to stay about the same. So once you actually know those numbers for yourself, for me, like that puts so much of my mind at ease because it takes this giant guessing game out of it. And I think where a lot of people really kind of fuck themselves up is, number one, a lot of people don't track their food at all. So that becomes very easy to then kind of play this game of ignorance with yourself where you're like, well, all I eat in a day is toast and then dinner, but you're not being mindful of all those little things that you're picking at throughout the day because you don't log your food in any way. So you're not mindful of what you're putting in your body. You're just kind of absently mindedly eating. So I think just learning how to be mindful of the food that you're eating, if you're not somebody that really wants to like track and weigh your food, I think that even just doing it loosely is good. Like even I remember you telling me like, if you don't want to get, MyFitnessPal and track your food, you can just write it down in a notebook and then just look at the end of the day and be like, these are the things that I ate today. And it just kind of puts in your mind like, okay, I'm eating mindfully. I'm looking at what I'm eating in a day and I'm seeing like, oh, actually 3 times today I went and ate a handful of chips. Okay, interesting. And then just learning where those numbers are. Like if you track your food for 1 week and you're like, for this whole week, I ate 1,600 calories a day and my weight stayed the same. Okay, that's good to know. So now I know that if next week, if I took it down to 1,500 calories, I could probably expect to see, a little bit of weight loss. Like it's just playing around and learning where your numbers are so that you can get clarity on why you are or aren't losing or gaining weight.
Well, you just come into the calorie tracking, right? That's probably the biggest game changer. If you would have had any calorie tracking when you were doing all that other working out, you would have definitely found it because you had a hell of an output. It was just the intake that you just weren't tracking. I mean, you wouldn't have had to done keto in order to get that deficit, but definitely would have worked significantly better. And I think it's really nice for you to highlight that value because I think so many people get success if they're going to calorie track. And it's probably nutritionally one of the biggest things for people to overcome is calorie tracking and consistent meal planning, having consistent meals. Like you can even calorie track, but then are they consistent meals? Like those are the 2 biggest things. And then I'd say protein in there, in no particular order, all 3 of those things has to be there. Now, the curiosity I have, and I imagine some other people want to know if they come from disordered eating, how does that not become obsessive? How do you manage, like, how is the comfort with this? Because you're so obsessive and meticulous, which actually, again, I'll even say from the pro, I look at it as like, well, she's hitting the exact calories I tell her. So that's a good thing. But how do you prevent yourself from being obsessive or worrying too much about it?
Yeah, I feel like part of the obsession honestly dissolved for me when I felt like I did have some of those answers and I had some of that clarity. Because I think that when I think about my experience, the reason that I would get so obsessive was because like I felt like I didn't understand why things weren't working for me. Like I didn't understand, why didn't keto make me lose weight? Why didn't I lose weight when I was fasting? Like for a long time, I really did have this belief that I couldn't look the way I wanted to look without being bulimic. So it's because I had this like giant question mark in my mind around like, why are these things not working? It makes it easy to become obsessive because you're like, well, I need to figure this out. So I think you and I working together and me realizing like, oh, so 1,300 calories is around where my body loses weight. It's higher than that now, but just learning what those numbers look like gave me a little bit of clarity so that when I did continue with tracking my macros, I felt like I already had an understanding of like why I was doing it. And again, I feel like something just shifted in my mind and I see it now more as just like, it's like an experiment. I'm like, okay, so right now I'm doing a bulk. I'm eating like 2,300 to 2,400 calories and I'm just tracking it to, it's kind of an experiment. I'm like, I want to see if my weight goes up this week. I want to like have my leg day tomorrow and feel really like fueled and strong when I do it. Like it all feels like it's for a purpose, but it's also more fun now because I've learned ways to take that obsession out of it. And some of that has come by just like feeling like I do understand my body a little bit better now. And yeah, I think it is kind of a slippery slope. Like it's like, when does calorie tracking become obsessive? But I think having that clarity, having an understanding of your body and knowing why you're doing it is okay. And I think also being willing to not do it. Like, I think where I see people get obsessive is when like they cannot take a day off of tracking, or they're tracking every single thing. Like I said, you're like weighing spinach and stuff. Like, if you feel like this is something that you have to do or else, then you just have to listen to that inner dialogue. Like, what are those thoughts that you're saying to yourself? And is it coming from a place of like punishment, or is it coming from a place of like curiosity? It's, you kind of, you know what your inner tone is like. And if it feels like it's coming from a negative place, then I would stop and kind of reflect on that and think like, am I taking this to an unhealthy place?
Right. No, and that the unhealthy place is really important. The level of obsession. Have I ever told you to track at a family gathering?
No, you gave me such good kind of advice for just like, maintaining things and being mindful of eating, but also like enjoying and living life and just eating, when you want to eat.
I even remember us taking diet breaks, and you said, I'm going to intuitively eat. I'm just going to, go out, and like, that's where you get healthier relationships with food, because the tracking is an education process. You're trying to actually realize what you're eating. Yeah. And then from there, ideally, you can even get to a point where you can intuitively eat a lot better more often. But I always say, when it comes to tracking, you track your way to success. So if you want to get stronger, write that number down. Otherwise, you're going to say, hey, I want to get stronger in the bench press. Do you know what you can do? Well, fuck. Then if you don't know, you don't know. Mm-hmm. And if I want to get, want to lose weight, or even if you want to gain weight and you have a hard time, you don't know if you're actually eating the right amount of calories. Like, even for yourself now, 2,400, 1,000 more calories than what you were used to having on a deficit before. And if you're not gaining weight, it's like, well, are these workouts working? I was like, well, trust me, you're working out. It's just, do you feed your body enough? And this is on both ends of the spectrum. People will have this mistake that when they're doing a calorie deficit, rather, they think they're in a calorie deficit, as you just mentioned. They think they're in a calorie deficit. Well, you can't be if you're not losing weight. And then other people are like, yeah, I'm having a hard time gaining size. And they might even be doing good workouts. There's like, you ever track your calories? No, but I think I get enough protein. And it's like, okay, you thinking isn't like imagining that the protein is for sure enough. And it's still not guaranteed to be enough calories. So on either end of the spectrum, people can have this issue. But I actually want to highlight something really cool for people to appreciate that you mentioned, is that your initial calorie deficit with us was 1,300. And your last calorie deficit was 1,400, or even at 1,450 almost, right? It was a little bit more.
15 or 16, yeah.
Yeah, which is really important for people to recognize, because she did a muscle building phase, and now she can eat more calories and lose more body fat at the same rate. And we actually didn't gain much in our muscle building phase, because I'll actually give you 100% credit. A few of my other clients are like this. You do a build phase better than I do, because you don't gorge yourself. You follow the meal plan. You keep the same systems. You don't just, dirty bulk it. You're actually thinking about getting a more dirty food so you can bulk more. And for myself, I always have to control myself as soon as I get in the bulking season. So I think you do a tremendous job of it. What I would love to kind of wrap up with here, though, because we do have all these new ambitions that you're going after. Why don't we talk about your most recent ambitions? Like, what are you going after? You had some goals that you set out for me that we're kind of working towards. So why don't you share that with some of the people here?
Yeah. So right now I'm doing a bulk. We're in like the last little leg of it, I think. I've been bulking since November, I think. So basically, when I went from a cut to a bulk, we slowly started increasing the calories. So it didn't jump just right from like 1,600 to 2,400. And I noticed that like this time around, like you said, I was losing weight at a higher calorie range. I think I was starting to lose around like 1,500, 1,600, which was cool to see that change. But then just like reintroducing more foods, I think that I understand now why people dirty bulk, or they bulk by just eating a lot of fast food, because it is easier. It's so easy to like go to Dairy Queen and eat 2,400 calories. It's so much easier than eating whole foods at home cooked meals. Like you really feel the difference in just food volume there, but it's fun. Like it's kind of fun to be like, eating so much that I'm like, oh wow, I have so much food left to eat today. But it's cool just like having you kind of doing a lot of that thinking for me. I get to take a lot of my thought process out of it. But yeah, doing a bulk right now, and that works very well with the holiday season because I don't know about you, but my mom makes some of the best baked Christmas goods in all the land. It's crazy.
What kind? I gotta. You got my curiosity. What's her best baked goods? Like, I gotta know what kind of cookies we're talking about here.
Oh man, she makes a rum cake that will actually blow your mind. Even if you hear the word rum cake and you don't think like, nah, that doesn't sound like my thing. I'm telling you, man, it's witchcraft. And oh man, it's like, I don't even know. It's like an angel food cake, but then she basically like kind of soaks it in this like sugary, nutty rum mix. So every time you cut into the cake, it's got like a little bit of a glaze and it's always moist. It's fuck. I'm getting hungry thinking about it.
I love it.
She does that so well. And then she just does a lot of different little dainties.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes very intoxicating because you go there and you're like, well, I want to try everything, and everything's so small and good looking. She does what she calls are like turtles, you know, those turtle chocolates, but she makes a homemade version. And so, God, she makes like homemade caramel from scratch and puts little nut pieces in there. And there's something about those that you're like, these are really, really good. She does a lot of great shit. So the bulk kind of worked well with the Christmas season because I'm like, I am going to be eating. And then in about 3 weeks, Alex and I are going to Thailand for 2 months. And so the plan is to transition back into a bit of a cut. And I'm excited to do that. I think that'll be interesting because I will be somewhere where, you know, most people in Thailand are always eating the street food. And it's got pros and cons. Like it's a lot of fresh food. It's a lot of fresh meats and fresh seafoods and really fresh fruits. And I'm excited for all that. But it does kind of throw a wrench into the whole like tracking thing. So I think that's going to be a bit of a journey to navigate, but I think that'll be a good time to transition back into a cut and kind of take the calories down, because I think it is easy to eat healthy in a place like Thailand where you are eating a lot of fresh foods, but at the same time, you're eating a lot of food prepared by other people. So that complicates it too. But I'm excited to do it with your help and guidance this time. And yeah, just kind of see how that goes. My goal is with the bulk to gain a little bit of mass in the glute area. And then the goal with the cut is to not just immediately lose it right away.
Yeah. The bulk has actually been really interesting because it's, even for a coach, from my perspective, and I've heard this a lot, and I mean, I haven't had as much of an issue with most people, or some people who are just easy for a deficit. It's just not hard and they can lose weight. Like for me to build is easy. Mm-hmm. But, you know, we've worked on the booty build for a couple of years now and it's built, but it's just, people do not appreciate how hard it is to build. And you're experiencing that, where we got you doing 3 lower body days a week with a ton of sets, a ton of like volume, and you're working your ass off literally in the gym. And it's just still like you don't get inches, like it's just bit by bit by bit.
Yeah.
And so it's a really difficult thing and people don't really appreciate it. And the thing that took me a while to appreciate is that when someone has the discomfort of, you know, because you're doing it right, you're eating whole foods, like bulk food, like eating at that calorie level, like being in surplus when it's whole food is hard still. It's still a discomfort thing. It's great to not feel like you're starving, you have more energy, you feel better in the gym and all those things, but still discomfort still requires discipline to be consistent on a meal plan.
Yeah.
But the Thailand thing is going to be an interesting challenge. You're going to challenge me and I'm going to challenge you. I'll actually even say, I think when you get there, because you're going to Thailand, I think you got to, like, your first month should be a goal of maintenance and just fucking live. I'm going to really recommend that because that's one of my favorite places in the world. For the first 2 to 3 weeks, I'm straight up, like, just be present and enjoy yourself. But it is an amazing place because there's a lot of whole foods and you're probably going to be on the go a lot. So the fitness on the go, I got a ton of different strategies for you on that. And you also have some physical goals you're going after. So pull-ups were one of them, but I think you already banged out 10 the other day. So I'm not sure what's your new goal for pull-ups? You want to hit like 20 or what's your goal?
I feel like 15 is my next goal. I just remember this was like so many years ago, back when I was doing, really shitty personal training. I remember seeing a video of a girl that I knew do 15, and I was like, oh, I want to do 15. And for some reason, that's always just stayed in my mind. So I think 15, no bands, just straight body weight would feel like a cool accomplishment for me. In terms of like heavy lifts, I don't have a lot of lifts that I have like specific weight goals for anymore. I think that I really wanted to get to 300 pounds with my hip thrusts, and I did that, and that's cool. I'm like, wow, I can move some weight with these hips. But other than that, it's just like, I just like growing. I like seeing the weights go up. I like seeing myself get stronger, and just kind of excited. I just want to like keep getting better at the movement so that I can do everything without any kind of like pain or ache or like, oh, this doesn't feel the way I think it should. It's just kind of like a journey, I think. But in terms of my physical goals, I mean, I just kind of want to keep going. I don't know. Everything that I can do now, like I can do so many things now that I couldn't do before. And that in itself is such an empowering feeling. Like, people who feel like they have mobility issues, or I remember you saying like people who say, I couldn't do a pull-up to save my life. And you're like, well, a pull-up literally could save your life. So just having the ability to know that like I can do anything. If I need to pull myself up, I can pull myself up. If I need to like outrun you, I could probably outrun you. It's an empowering feeling. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of, enjoying the ride at this point.
And one of the things you said was a one-arm push-up, which is going to be one of the Thailand projects. So
yeah, one-arm push-up, that would be cool.
I'm not sure if you noticed, like I was trying to introduce more push-ups in the program, and even like the push-pull that we were doing, more single-arm stuff. So we're building up that single-arm strength a lot. And we'll probably do some like isolations here on your Thailand trip. We'll be doing some eccentrics on that. And I'm not saying for sure, but my hope for you is like, how long is the Thailand trip?
So we're going to be there for 2 months. We're not going to be moving around a ton. Like we got one Airbnb for the first month and another for the second month. And both of them have pretty well-equipped gyms. So As soon as I get there, I'll send you a little video and show you what I'm working with. But they looked, pretty good. That was one of the big critiques we had. We were like, okay, there's certain things that we're looking for in an Airbnb. They have to have such and such internet speed. There has to be at least 2 places in the unit where we can be working separately in case we're both on meetings. And it has to have a gym that's, sufficient for us. Like we're not talking about 2 dumbbells and a ball. Like we need a gym. So yeah, they're both pretty well equipped. So we'll have to pivot a little bit, but I don't think it'll be too restrictive in terms of what we can do.
I'm actually really impressed because I mean, I went on a tour and there was only another little extra weekend a bit that I was out there. I didn't see that many indoor gyms. So I'm actually really impressed that you managed to find something like that. And bear in mind, it was quite a few years ago, so gyms are more common now, but super excited for you, Kelsey. I think that's awesome. And I think we'll wrap it up there, and we'll have to have you on again in the future. We'll talk about the Thailand experience. We'll talk about all your other builds and cuts that we'll do in the future. But with that being said, I actually think it'd be great if you even share more about your business, if you'd like to share where people can find more information from you.
Yeah. So our brand is called Inspired Idiots, and people sometimes think that we're joking about that, but no, we're not, because basically what we do is we help people get into online business and start their online business. I think a lot of people today aren't really necessarily happy in their job situation, and they know that they want to work for themselves and they want to be financially free and work from anywhere, but not a lot of people know how to do that or where to start or even believe that they can do it. So that's kind of what we try to do, is put resources out there and just help people learn about online business and get into it and find one that works for them. So that's kind of why we're Inspired Idiots, because our belief is that anybody who's ever dared to do their own thing and break out of the norm and be an entrepreneur was at one point nothing more than an inspired idiot. So that's it's kind of what we live and breathe. And I mean, the simplest way to find us would just be at inspiredidiots.com. That's our bit of an outdated blog site, but you can find us and find ways to connect with us there. And we've started a Facebook group. We've started a free newsletter where every week we interview somebody who is running a successful online business, and we basically break down you kind of get them to explain their business in very simple language so that even the most new business newbies could read it and be like, oh, I understand what you do. So you can find that on our website, inspiredidiots.com as well.
Awesome. I do love that name. I never heard the story of the background where Inspired Idiots came from. I just thought it was a fun Instagram handle. And I was like, now that you say it, it's like, yeah, you're just an inspired idiot at the start, because it's kind of a stupid thing to think that you can make your own. But you have to have that stupid belief to do something crazy and something awesome. So I love that. I think that's well stated. So thanks again, Kelsey. Thanks so much for coming on, and we'll have you on again soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Rylan. Always good to talk to you.
Thanks so much, Kelsey. I really enjoyed hearing her full and complete story from where she had all her difficulties at the start. That's my favorite part of someone's story. Where did it start? Where was all the real big challenge? And right from high school, right? So this has been with her for a very long time. And I cannot imagine the stress of going through disordered eating behaviors, but then to actually have it actually reinforced because people are complimenting your physique. Now, when I had my disordered eating, I was using laxative. No one really knew, and I didn't use it that often. And it wasn't like I was reinforced, other than I felt better because I felt like I digested the food fast, obviously, and that's what would happen. And I wouldn't feel as bloated, and I would feel like I kind of got away with that meal, which isn't great. But that's exactly kind of what happened with her. Plus, people would say, oh, hey, you look great. And so I can see that becoming its own nature of being obsessive and being reinforced. But then for her to start to realize those red flags, those things about like, man, if I can't be honest with people about what I'm doing, should I be doing it? And I think that's a really important sentiment. And that's what binge eating has really been so obvious to me, that I got to work on this behavior. If I can't, eat all this food in front of someone, why am I doing it? I think it's one thing to have self-reflection. It's another thing to look in the mirror with someone else standing there. That's a real honest reflection, because you have to be very honest on how other people are going to depict you. Sometimes you don't want to care what other people are thinking, but sometimes the people you care about, you should concern yourself with. And that's something that if you know someone, or if you have been in the past having disordered eating, I think an important message to reflect on. And I think when she came out of it, it was really important for people to appreciate it was not an overnight fix. She said from the get-go, fitness is a lifelong journey, but for sure, she struggled with other things. She's used the keto, the fasting, all these things until we were able to get her on the right path. And I hope the message that we got to you was, it can be simple. It just needs consistency, and you need the right systems in line. And once we had that, she had true, I keep calling it fitness freedom. She went from using a calorie deficit around 1,300, and then the year later, she's had 1,500, 1,600, and she's losing body fat. Great. So she's honestly growing her metabolism. That's what happens. So with the proper steps and the proper systems, some amazing things can happen to you. And I hope you can really pay attention to the message of calorie tracking and how effective it can be, because that alone is what most people are missing. And I truly mean the sentiment. A meal plan, calorie tracking, and protein will do 90% of what you need nutritionally. The only other thing is be consistent with walking and strength training. That's it. That's the recipe, right? Who's going to hold you accountable to it is the question. So I do hope that this whole message really taught you a lot of things, but I want to help other people like Kelsey. So if anything from Kelsey's message really resonated with you, you think you're like Kelsey in any way, please reach out to me, because I love working with people like Kelsey. I truly do. Now, I'm only doing this promo through my podcast. I thought about doing it on social media, email list, but I said only through the podcast. Someone who's gotten this far in my podcast, I'm going to give you this offer. And it's 2 free additional months on any membership that you sign up with within the next week. And I'm only doing it on the podcast. It's very simple. You won't see it anywhere else. But I'm very serious about anyone who's listened to this entire podcast, who gives me more than an hour of their time and is willing to listen to my message that long and that committed. You have some special interest in training and nutrition and trust in me. And I want to grant you some great credit for that. So if you message me within the next week, I will give you an additional 2 months off any membership that you sign up with. And if you know anyone, feel free to share this podcast with them, and they can get that same promo. And we'll have to have some sort of promo name. So we'll just call it Kelsey's bonus, because it'll tell me that you actually listen to the podcast, Kelsey's story, and you get that bonus offer. All right. But even if you don't, If you're just going to go after your own thing, I still encourage you, do anything you can in the new year to have great change in your life. I highly recommend it, because any good reason to change in a positive way is a positive thing. And I give you a lot of credit, and I hope that this podcast helps you do so. And I'm always going to do this more routinely in the podcast. Thank you sincerely for listening. I really appreciate any listener that is willing to give me this much time and trust in my message, that I'm able to help you out with your pursuit. Because life isn't about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the happiness within your pursuit. And I'll catch you next time.